Hello, everybody, and welcome to Duke Reads. My name is Frank Stasio. I'm the host of The State of Things on North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, and I'm happy to be with you again as we kick off the 5th season of the Duke Alumni Association Duke Reads Book Club. This season, the faculty selectors have been asked to choose a book that has significantly or had significant impact on their lives, and tonight I'm going to begin with Maureen Quilligan on a novel written by her husband, Michael Malone. The book is Dingley Falls. Maureen Quilligan is the R. Florence Binkley Professor of English at Duke University, and she's been at Duke for 11 years, served as department chair for 6. Before coming to Duke, she taught at Yale and the University of Pennsylvania. She was married to Michael Malone and is the author for 36 years. They have been married, to make that clear. They met at graduate school, and they were both studying Renaissance literature. Maureen chose this book, she says, because it made her realize that Michael was not merely a very good popular novelist, but a writer whose work will endure for the ages. When a colleague asked her, how do you live with him? She understood that others realized this as well, and it was a struggle. She said, had a struggle at that point and asked herself, should I sacrifice my life to help him make great art? We'll find out more about that and about what she thinks of Dingley Falls. We're also interested in your thoughts as well. So, you can contact us with your questions live at DukeReads, live at duke.edu. That's the email address, Twitter, #DukeLive. And we're happy to hear from you, Maureen Quilligan. Great to see you.
Great to see you again.
Right. And what a great choice.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, yes.
Keeps
I guess I didn't choose it. It was just presented to me.
It chose you.
It did.
You say it changed your life. How?
Well, as you were suggesting, I realized with a shock after I had struggled with the book when I was first reading, and I've read every single one of Michael's books out loud to him, word by word. And this one was strange. It was trickier than the other two that I had read out loud to him, the first 2 books. This was his third. And I remember taking a walk through New Haven, Connecticut at the time, thinking, this is really strange. In fact, it's something that you mentioned you had trouble with, is that there were so many people coming at me all at once, and I didn't know how I was supposed to think about them. There was a strange kind of irony, and I didn't quite get what I was supposed to think of Tracy Canopy and Beanie Abernathy and Pris Ransom, and it was troubling to me. Subsequently, I have read it any number of times, and as I reread, I spent my whole life rereading Milton's Paradise Lost, Spenser's Faerie Queene, Chaucer. Each time I read them, I'm more and more amazed at the density and the level and the exquisiteness and the pleasure of art. And that has been the same experience I've had with Dingley Falls. And I must admit, Chaucer was hard the first time through, too. So at first, when I was first asked about choosing a book, I had thought about doing Thornton Wilder, Woman of Andros, which I think I must have read when I was in the 7th grade. I got it out of the library when I was living in Los Angeles, and I read the very first paragraph of it, and it was a bolt of revelation that, in fact, a book could have an exquisite verbal surface as well as telling a great story. And at that point, I decided to leave behind Walter Farley's wonderful Black Stallion series, The Black Stallion Returns, The Black Stallion, The Island Stallion Returns, which had been my reading until that point, which was great stories, and to realize that there was an exquisite and beautiful art to this reading of books as well as the great stories. And I thought about doing that, and then I thought, no, why not do Dingley Falls? Because I had understood that Dingley Falls was a great work of art, finally, and should it change my life, should I do everything I possibly can to help Michael do nothing but write? And I thought, well, so many women's lives have been sacrificed to, writer husbands, that perhaps a better kind of art might be made without that sacrifice. It was certainly convenient for me. But the signal, if I could share with you, the signal that was, that I think was a signal of the simile on the opening of a paragraph of Woman of Andros, which is the water lay like a wet pavement before the city of Alexandria, and that just astonished me. I hesitate to say that I stole the book. I mean, I paid for it, but I didn't give it back to the library because I wanted to keep that. Michael always has a sentence in the first paragraph that makes that same signal that this is real art that's going to make some sort of claim upon your attention. And in Handling Sin, which a lot of people, more people have read maybe than Dingley Falls, it's the word Antipodean whim. I just love that phrase. And there's this incredible syncopation in the sentence, and I'd like to read it to you because it strikes me as having all the marks of a post-Joycean, postmodernist, modernist and postmodernist novel, because it's doing all the job of telling the story, but it has a kind of syncopation that I hear playing with Joyce's imperthin thin, when he has the sound of the horse's hooves going through Dublin. And here is what it is. It's in the first paragraph. May I read it?
Yeah, please.
This is about Judith Haig, who is going to be the heroine of the novel, although we don't know that for quite some time. She's the postmistress. And here is sort of the third sentence about her. All she did there at the post office was raise, then lower the flag, weigh packages and sell stamps, slip into their slots the rare letters and regular government checks that sustained those, very few, too indigent to have homes to which the postman, Alf Marco, could take their mail. Now, the sell stamps, slip into their slots, the rare letters, regular checks. I mean, we could talk about the alliteration and the balance, the chiastic constructures, the anaphora of that. But its syncopated rhythms start to give you that remarkable, playful, ironic tone. And the fact that right here in this sentence is the entire plot by which the mail, the stamps and letters, the rare letters and regular government checks. This is sort of like, English Literature 101, here we go, or English Literature 1. Notice, rare letters and regular government checks. The rare letters are the objects of the poison that's being circulated through the town and is taking down the individual people with the brucellosis and salmonella. So those rare letters is the secret base. And regular government checks is a statement about the kind of work that government should do, but government is no longer doing because they have lost track of the fact that there is a secret base making a weaponized virus, very much like anthrax. Somebody once said when I said I was going to talk about the book, they said, "Oh, you should. It's so prescient." That means it's so foreknowing and prophetic about what we subsequently learned. They've been spraying the mailbags and the letters with this virus that is now causing the hearts of Dingleyans to collapse in various ways. So that's the density of that sentence and the work it does for the whole novel and the fact that one can point out to it there that it's all implicit there suggests to me that it works the same way, Paradise Lost does, anything that I love to deal with. I could go on, but
It's
I won't.
interesting, though, that you say, because you've talked about this book and you wrote in your comment about the book that initially you felt it was all over the place, it was a little confusing, and you didn't find all this, whereas Women of Andros, right away, you said a bolt from the blue. It grabbed you right away. And this is a book that when you spend time with it, it reveals itself one page at a time and sometimes one reading at a time. Right. And you talked about the way the text works, that we're going to talk later about the structure, and then there's the story. And it's delightful, too, because the fact is, even if I had a hard time keeping track of all the characters, I could continue to read because the language itself is delightful. I mean, you just laugh out loud, you have a good time reading it.
Right, and you not only laugh out loud, but I think you really need to take it seriously. I think there's a sort of a real interesting darkness to this. Handling Sin is a very, very comic novel, and this one ends on a very triumphant, sublime note of sublime, even idiocy, with the, Father Hywick's beautiful sermon on the seventh day when everybody rests. So it's hexameral literature. It's a 7-day. It's about the creation itself. There's huge resonance at the level of the sentence and the level of the largest structures. But I'll let you ask me about that.
Well, before we get to that, I'll tell you what, let's move on to the second question, and then we're going to come back, because I want to talk about this business of prescience and how it read in 1980 when it was published, set in 1976, published 1980, and now coming to it in 2011. Does it speak to the present moment, and how has it changed for you over time as you've read this book?
I think how it's changed for me over time is just that I think it's a greater and greater work of art. I knew it was an important book. When I first had trouble with it, it was just the very first chapters. And by the time it finished, I knew it was a big book. And the first reading, after it was finished, I knew it was an important book. As my friend, a colleague who was teaching at Yale said, "How do you live with him?" It was very interesting because she was living with Robert Fitzgerald at the time, who was a great poet, and she wanted to know. She was saying, "Michael is like Robert. How do we do this?" And I said, "We enjoy the reading experiences that we have." So I knew it right away as soon as it was finally done. And I don't think Michael always says that life imitates art, not that art imitates life. Aristotle's theory is that it's all mimetic, but that, the joke is that it's not life imitating, art imitating life, but vice versa. And that the world of government irresponsibility has finally caught up with the vision that Michael saw in Dingley Falls. And the the evil of this book is not the crazy scientists, Svadopluk, or Sweater Pluck, or all the different names, the jokes everybody has with his name that you can't pronounce, a Middle Eastern European scientist, the mad scientist, who is indeed a good scientist, trying to do exactly what he's been told, to weaponize viruses, which is hard to do, as he explains, or even the Tom, Dick, and Harry people who come out to discover what's going on at the secret base. They're not so evil, they're almost laughable, as with their names, Tom, Dick, and Harry. The real evil in the book is Ernest Ransom, who is the banker. Sorry, he just happens to be a banker. He happens to be a Republican banker, but a Republican banker who used to have a real, let me give you a big word, chthonic responsibility to his own land. Chthonic means having to do with the earth. His own relationship to the earth he owned. Sort of like a Faulkner moment of going out and hunting on the land, the pioneer experience. And he has sold it to the federal government and has abrogated the responsibility which he's inherited with this land. And then he goes out to see what's happened, because he saw the secret base at one point. And then he goes out again when Dr. Scaper says people are dying of heart attacks. It's just like a burnt earth, and he remembers the black earth that was in the secret, near the secret base on his land. And he goes out to find out what it looks like now. He expects it will be gone. He expects it was some flamethrower or napalm from the Vietnam War, but it's still there, and he doesn't want to see it. And ultimately, his evil is to stop the truth from coming through. When Luke Packer and Polly Hedgerow, two children of Dingley Falls, of the town, go out and have their sort of Nancy Drew-like experience and take pictures of the secret base, they come back and give it to Ernest Ransom, because he's the first selectman of the town and has a government responsibility for this fact. And the moment of evil in the book is when Ernest Ransom takes their film, couldn't do it with a digital camera now, could you? Takes their film and spreads it open to the sun in front of the window. exposing the film, here's the wordplay, exposing the film so that they cannot expose what his irresponsibility, erasing by exposure what ought to be exposed, how the truth ought to be laid bare, and how the young people think they're going to do something useful, because here's a secret of the secret base.
And prescient, again, because it also looks forward to a time when conservatism, American conservatives, change from a kind of patrician class with a responsibility to the earth, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but individual responsibility, to the utter commodification of everything and the private, so that responsibility means responsibility for yourself, and if you don't, it doesn't really matter what happens to you. We don't. That's a sea change in conservatism in American politics that really wasn't obvious in 1980. I mean, it could have been, but to only the most
Prescient of people,
prescient
the
of
most
people.
prophetic of great
yeah.
artists who
That's pretty wild.
yeah, and alas and alack, like Plato says, they don't really know what they're doing. They're crazy, so let's not let them in the republic. Artists and poets, they speak with a divine furor. They don't really know what they're doing. In fact, Michael does. I keep trying to tell him that I found something he didn't know about, and that Plato was right about him, but he knows it all.
But at the same time, life imitating art. This notion that the artifice is the reality. Michael does seem to undercut this to some extent, right? I want to get to concerning plots, these wonderful little breakouts where we get the narrator giving us an insight. We're all premeditators, plotting one thing or another. Hawk Haig is plotting to be rich. Chin Lam Henry plotting to free her husband. Limas Barnum is plotting to be accepted or avenged. No one can return to spontaneity. Language will not let us go, but bars us with its sword our return to that wordless, thoughtless Eden. Beanie Abernathy wishes there were no words, and yet she must write a letter. Even Sloane Hywick must have some plot in mind, if only to how to persuade his host to offer him a martini.
I'm sorry. That's wonderful.
But I mean, and words are the problem. In a way, the artifice language has become the thing that traps us in our plots and our schemes.
Well, it's certainly the stuff of art, and it's plots. What's the first one? Plots, concerning plots, then concerning letters. And the connection, I mean, one of the things I think somebody points out, Joanne, says that, is the sexuality related to the secret base, and I think we do need to talk about that.
Right.
But that I at first thought the secret base was not completely integrated into the book, and it is, a discussion of the secret base does take place in those little concerning chapters, but it's terrifically integrated. For instance, concerning letters. The CIA, the NIA, the CDC, and then Limas Barnum's letters exposing, as the exposure, exposing the secret sexual desires of everyone in town, as Ernest stops the exposure of the secret base. Both Brickhart, Commander Brickhart, who I love, and Ernest Ransome collude in that, even though Ransome, of course, doesn't know it. Brickhart is not evil either, because he's doing what he's supposed to do. It's the abrogation of Ernest Ransome's responsibility that you just talked about, and its prescient understanding of where conservatism could derail itself. Okay, but you were asking about something else. What was it?
No, I think that's it. I mean, just this notion that to some extent words are the problem, art is the problem. I mean, even the beauty of that image, exposing to conceal, and that's what words do. We often use words, and the more we say, the less we know. We know that phenomenon, right? How words conceal.
No, I don't. Well, I'm an English teacher, and I refuse to believe. I think language is going to save us, as well as as Frederick Jameson, who teaches at Duke, says it's a prison house of language. But in fact, it's not entirely that. It is the only way out. It's our only contact as well with our history. So the first one is concerning plots. Then we have concerning letters. Then we have concerning scenarios, or the heart. We have concerning the heart. Lub-dub, the language of the heart is lub-dub swish. swish, but there's all this language of the heart. And the last one is diction, how our diction reveals who we are. And I think the saving grace is in language itself. It's not simply that it poses a problem for Beanie, or for Father Harwick, both of which people are really rather inarticulate, but their inarticulateness is understood by the exquisiteness of the language of this art. And it's possible, as you said, just even if you lose track of who the characters really are, because there's so many coming at you at once, you can still have fun with the language, the surface language. But there is a profound reality to these people as well. And the language doesn't lie about them. It's funny that Joanne thinks that they were towns in the past and now in the present with a hierarchy of townspeople. The wealthy and important ones are the lower class who are not treated with respect. I guess I don't really quite understand what that statement means, except it seems to me everybody in Dingley Falls is at first treated with the same ironic, syncopated language, where the author is having so much fun with the words that we're not sure he's really paying as much attention to the humanity of the characters as we would like him to. And then we suddenly realize that through that language, these people become heroic in their own lives. Sarah McDermott's anguish that she has caused the problem with Judith because she told Maynard Henry and made him go out there and have the whole catastrophe happen. She's lower class. She looks like she's mocked. She doesn't really understand, the complications of Judith Haig, whose friend she persists in being because she's just going to love her friend. But we see her moral anguish as the kind of moral anguish Ernest Ransome doesn't have, the kind of anguish that is so overpowering for Judith that she seems stunned by her moral perception that the people who are left out of the American dream should rise up and choke the throats of the people who are better off than they are, that just has the injustice of the inequality of the world just stuns her and she walks around frozen, but that she is ultimately able to make a move. Finally, she takes on the full agency for a murder, like Judith decapitating Holofernes. And yes, Michael knew that. I thought that was a great revelation of me. Oh, I know why she's called Judith. And he said, yeah. Finally, after 20, how many years it was. That the saving grace is both forgiveness and, Sloane Hywick's vision, plus also the law, the very careful letter of the law in the exquisite details of Winslow Abernathy's figuring out what he can know as the lawyer for Maynard Henry and what he can't know, and the terrific adjustment of moral responsibility and adjudication and telling literal lies and telling figurative lies, and the truth in fiction. So I think that language is the greatest stay against chaos, and the greatest stay against the violence of these untruths. So I would not say that.
But it all depends on how we use it and whether or not we're sort of mindful of the
right.
The
Yes,
control.
absolutely.
And that's absolutely. And of course, when you think about the control in this novel, both with the language, the plot, and then the structure, which we will get to, it's exquisite. I want to get to another of Joanne's questions, though. First, Joanne says, Dingley Falls women use abbreviations for swear words. In the present, if women choose to swear, they use full terms. I guess that's her comparison between kind of what was happening in 1976 and now.
I think that's just Pris Ransom, GD this, and like Beanie stands around like a GD teenage horse. I mean, it's just that she's so vicious. But The fact that she is, Ernest Ransom's wife, and is Prissy, and it's an old patrician Puritan name, but she really is a prisspot, and very superficial in the most wonderful ways. And I think that she wants to be able to curse, but she's going to somehow hide behind it and not really actually curse, so she in fact abbreviates it. But she's the only one who does it, and her diction is very, very distinctive to her. You always know she's talking because she does what an H.
Right. And it's one of the wonderful ways in which these characters come alive. As you said, when I started reading the book and saw how the characters were being treated, I felt the same way. I thought, well, this is going to be just an ironic treatment of sort of middle-class, mindless Americans or something. That's not nice, and it's a lot of pages, I thought at first. Then they started to come to life as these distinctions in their diction, as you said, and of course, the character behavior, all of it. Wow, these are actually you really fooled me. They started out as cartoon characters, and then they sort of came to life on the screen.
Right.
It was wonderful.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Joanne also asked, family relationships, again, the comparison then and now, family relationships in the past and in the present contain complex family dynamics. They are the suggestion that there's a lot in common with the time.
Then and now, right. It's interesting that the 1976, this year, was the year our daughter was born. And I think that's sort of a little celebration of family. And yes, there are lots of family dynamics and intermarriages in this small little town too, and that's how people understand it. Actually, we went to the actual town itself. We went to for the one day we had on our honeymoon because I had to come back and grade papers for Yale University. Was Washington Depot, and there was a circle, Elizabeth Circle in Washington Depot. And it's interesting because the couple in white, I don't know whether or not you remember them, there's a little couple in white that are wandering around the cemetery when Tracy is finally visiting Louis Daytona's sculpture of the twisted, Buick, tailpipes. And they come up and Louis Daytona's with her and he says, that's trash. And the couple in white say, no, this is a great work of art. The little couple in white was us. A little honeymooner, so.
Well, I won't ask you about any more of the autobiographical parts.
No. There are nothing else. That's it. That's the only appearance we make. Although it is interesting that Tracy Canopy, who looks like she's mocked, as you said, a cartoon character, turns out to have exquisite taste in art. As Louis Daytona says, you've got all the number one, 20th century jammers back in your the back room in the apartment that he didn't really trash in New York City. Stella and Motherwell and so on and so forth. That she really had an eye, and that in fact probably Louis Daytona's Buick's tailpipes. Michael is very interested in what art can do and what art can do, and he's the wonderful moment in New York, the art scene, where he mocks that New York art scene, is just hysterically funny. I hope you enjoyed that as well as the mockery of other things. But by the same token, Louis Daytona says that Habsi Rabies, the Pakistani paper who made the toilet seat out of the Castro's head, with Priss's nice comment about not being able to use it. It's very funny. He is now off to paint resistance pictures, murals on the Alas Ore pipeline. The Alaska Oregon is probably what you think it means, Alas Ore pipeline, and of course it's the very pipeline that poor Commander Brickhart has had to take part in because he's been rusticated from the military because of his bad heart. I mean, he has a heart attack, but not the kind of heart attack from Dingley Falls. Again, you see how it's just all perfectly seamless. But then there's also that wonderful moment of alas, or that there's the what we need to do and what's always seems to destroy the chance for human community that isn't purely economic. Alas, it's just ore. And of course, oil is now the new ore gold, the new high-priced commodity. And Habsy Rabies is doing what you're supposed to do, which is to go and object to that. And of course, there's now this big Alaska pipeline coming down, I mean, from Canada. So it's prescient in another way. It's not that Michael figured it out. It was going on then.
Sure.
But he was just paying attention to it so that these silly little moments that seem just funny, have this huge political resonance. And, that's the kinds of things actually we're now realizing, are going on in Shakespeare plays, that they are deeply, deeply and profoundly tied to their historical political moment in ways that we have neglected to understand.
I want to ask another of Joanne's questions, again related to your question number 2, then and now. Just as Dingley Falls townspeople didn't know what the government was doing in their town, we were also unaware of many of the behind-the-scenes government actions. I think we talked a little bit about that, the prescience of government activity these days. And of course, we now know less and less by law. We have given away much of our birthright in the name of safety, and you wonder how safe that makes you.
And it is also interesting, too, that it required not merely 9/11 for us to give it all up, but the anthrax scare, which happened so quickly after it. And I think most people don't really when we celebrate all this 9/11 issues, how it changed the world. There was this other thing that happened. I don't want to go into any conspiracy theories, but I do want to point out something that no one seems to pay any attention to is in the question of who was it who sent the evil powder through the mails and killed all those people. It was a terrible thing. I mean, many, not as bad as 9/11, but people died, and postal workers died, like Alf Marco dies in the book. What no one ever seems to call attention to is that everyone assumes, naturally, this weaponized anthrax was made in a government lab. It only could be made in a government lab. That means we accept, without thinking about it, the government is weaponizing biological warfare. We expect it. No one even comments. We didn't know. Is our government supposed to be weaponizing anthrax, weaponizing viruses, weaponizing this, that, and the other thing? I'm sorry that you didn't even know what I meant. But the question is, should the government be doing that sort of stuff? They don't even have to keep it secret. I mean, they haven't kept it secret from us that it's a weaponized version of anthrax done in a government lab. It's just which government lab as we play around with the FBI tracking around and it's Ivans or it's somebody else. It's the fact that this activity was going on and was supported, and everybody knew it was going on. It was just, whose anthrax was it? And it could have been any number of people's because everyone, it is accepted now. We legitimately accept that our government is doing germ warfare, doing biological warfare. Even they tell us, it's not that they have to keep it from us, it's out in plain sight, and we seem to not care about it.
And never anticipate the blowback, as the CIA calls it. So when we do it, it will always be in our name and to protect us. And it will never blow back as it has so often. And remember, it was the CIA who virtually created Al-Qaeda. You have to understand that, that they put together a network of fundamentalist Muslims in order to fight the Russians in Afghanistan, who then ultimately are now our enemy. We made that organization. And so it's hard to remember that when you do these very, very bad, wrong things, eventually it's going to come back.
Or maybe not even so eventually. I mean, it comes back really rather quickly.
Really rather quickly.
And it's interesting that Michael seems to have in his second book, there's a very important moment when a helicopter crashes. The secret base might have been exposed or taken care of by Tom, Dick, and Harry, but when the government people leave, Svatopluk understands that they're his enemy. They're going to shut down the base for reasons to protect themselves, because it would be wrong to do into their lapels. It would be wrong to do. To have this weaponization of, they're so far behind
That's right.
the game. They still think it would be wrong.
That's right.
We don't even say it would be wrong anymore. But then he throws the rock at the helicopter, and it spirals down into the Breadfruit Pond. We've seen so many helicopters go down. Michael was thinking of the helicopter, up which people were crawling for the end of the Vietnam War, that moment. But there have been Black Hawk Down. There's been, just very recently, I noticed there was another, a helicopter crash. It's a sort of that awkward image of that strange bug-like, not at all a World War II kind of jet fighter that seems to keep flopping out of the sky, and showing us that we can't do this kind of heroics, even if we were right to do it before.
Move on to question number 3. What's the function of explicit sexual content, especially masturbation? What is this to do, if anything, with the secrecy of the secret base?
Right. Well, Joanne says the explicit sexual content seemed out of place unless the author felt the shocking details were similar to the shocking purpose of the secret base. The explicit sexual content, she said, was a bit of a jolt. Did others get taken aback by the first and later incidents? I must say that the first time anyone brought this to my attention, I was standing in a town in Connecticut holding a little toy poodle under my arm in a very short shorts. This old lady came up to me and said, that book is obscene. And I said, oh, that's not obscene. And I looked at what I looked like. I had to laugh.
It says you.
Oh, yeah, it says you. Okay. Obscenity is, I suppose, in the eye of the beholder. I guess the question is it obscene as, when, Leopold is going to the bathroom, and is masturbating himself in a key moment in Ulysses. And I do think, although Michael says, I've never read James Joyce, I don't believe him there. And I do think that it's this modernist moment, and if you're going to go Joyce one better, you better do it really well. But I also think it's not just, as Dante says about Statius or Lucan, staccia Lucano, I'm going to do a better job than you did in these snakes transformed into people. Michael is doing masturbation one better than Joyce did, because there's so many different signal variations. It's the kind of relationship with self that should be kept secret, like the secret base should be kept secret. But we often mistake sexual secrets for the political secrets, like we're so much more interested in sexual secrets than we are in political secrets, whereas both, the exposure of both is really not a problem. It is part of life. It is part of a full sexuality, and it is part of a sick, destroyed, pained person. Limas Barnum, who is a rapist, is a very unattractive person, and his, as Joanne says, and later incidents, Limas Barnum's sort of literally self-abuse. I mean, we call masturbation self-abuse, but he really does abuse himself out of a kind of self-hatred. It is distinctive of who he is. And then, of course, he turns out to be the person who rapes Judith Haig, fulfilling her horror that something horrible is going to happen to her, and indeed it does. But it's funny that at one point, Michael or I noticed, I don't remember who, that Limas Barnum breathes his mouthwash on the girls when they walk by his store, so that even he is trying to be in relationship, fails miserably with his Nazi propaganda, and his violence and his own sexual self-hatred, so that masturbation becomes a way of accepting your own body, if you can. I mean, Limas can't, but we need to accept sexuality. And we need to understand that keeping that secret is less important than certainly than the deep and profoundly disabling and killing secrets of the secret base. When Polly Hedgerow is trying to is going out to take pictures of the secret base with Luke Packer, her mother was killed by brucellosis. She's an orphan because of the first tests that they ran when they were giving, or she had salmonella, I think, brucellosis and salmonella, that Otto Scaper understands is something mysterious and problematic. It's just not right. Something's bad in the water. Well, it's the irresponsible government that has allowed this to go on.
Well, and these secrets are really the result of a wrongful right. I mean, a wrongful relationship with the self. The idea that at the government level, this obsession with protection, this obsession with saving my life against that other out there, right? A disconnection with the other, and so. I can do anything. I can do anything to protect myself from that other, and it becomes a kind of narcissistic, and then ultimately violent, right? But it's in the name of something, and of course, masturbation again, a sexual relationship with the self, because I'm cut off from the other. I can't.
Yes, sexuality should be shared, but one sort of hopes. I guess I did have hope that Pris might someday discover that, in fact, she can have a sexual life when she is trying to figure out how to masturbate because she can't do it, and then she thinks it's really ridiculous that women make all these funny noises, when they're having sex, because she doesn't really believe it. It's really a sad statement. So, in some way, sexual practice, even when alone, can be a staging ground for the better expression of it, deeply and profoundly with someone else. But it is interesting. I hadn't thought of that, and maybe I need to think about it again. That it's like an intern narcissism.
Your next time through, you can do that.
I will.
Want to get to some other of Joanne's comments as well. Again, both are out of sync. We're talking about sexuality and the secret base. Both out of sync with the small town values, beliefs, and gossipy knowledge about what's going on. There were detailed descriptions of explicit sex, but the secret base seemed to lack substance and detail. The latter could have been better developed. I kept waiting to read more about the townspeople's discovery of the base, and I had wished that Luke and Polly had gotten that film developed.
Me too. Me too. Indeed. But it's not a Nancy Drew thing.
Yeah.
It's really very interesting. One of the first editors who had the book said to Michael that you need to rewrite it from the point of view of Polly Hedgerow because it's this this narrator is all over the place. And I said at that point, we just bought our house in Clinton, Connecticut, and I said, Michael, we'll just put this house back on the market, and we'll have plenty of time to have you find another editor who will accept this as is. Wow. So it was an interesting moment. I remember sitting on the couch. This editor is absolutely and utterly wrong.
Did you persuade the editor or find a new one?
Found a new one.
Wow.
And he actually even had to fire an agent. It was tough. It was tough. I mean, life is not easy, but it was real easy to make that decision. We do want to have that kind of story. We love those kinds of stories. This is a harder story. This is a story that is so big and so large and so resonant with so much of American history that it's a lot more than a lot of people want. We often joke back and forth, Michael and I, that wonderful moment in the film of Salieri, Amadeus, yes, the Schaffer screenplay when the emperor says too many notes. And Dingley Falls has too many notes. It has too many people. But they're the kind of too many notes that I think subsequently, repay, consistent rereadings over and over again. Whereas I think I tried to go back and read Walter Farley, and I really had to chuckle and laugh. And it was good storytelling, but laughably unresonant at the level of a sentence or the paragraph. And I think your despair and dismay. I kept waiting to read more about the townspeople's discovery of the base. I had wished that Luke and Polly had gotten the film developed, which is to say, I wish Ernest Ransome had been the person they thought he was, that he was going to turn around and say, oh my God, what have I done? I've been irresponsible. I have sold out my birthright to the evil people in our government that were not gentlemen. As he said, he'd had committed adultery by voting for JFK at one point, but never again. That was I mean, it's interesting that it's a sexual term for a political, quote, infidelity. Again, there's the politics and sexuality there. But I think had Luke and Polly, had he offered you that pleasure in the text, you wouldn't have been forced to ask the next question. Well, they didn't manage it. Did they fail, or who failed? And as I perhaps said too early, it's really Ernest Ransom who is the evil character in here.
Right.
As beautiful and as lovely as they are, when Walter Sayre is at the communion rail at the end, he says, they look beautiful even from behind as they're kneeling to take communion. And Pris is staggered that her sophisticated gay headmaster is there at the rail, being pulled down to take communion. He says, oh, what the hell?
Well, I think that's what, in a sense, saves it for me, the idea that communion, that we can commit the most heinous, heartless, right, alienated of all acts. I've completely cut myself off from even my own history, my own past. But there's something about the potential of communion to allow any of us to repent, and this thing could be saved. This whole enterprise could be saved. Anyway, that's what I took from the end. Don't take that away from me now.
No, I'm not. It isn't. No. I'm not going to take it away from you. It's not that it could be saved. It is saved. It is saved because there's everybody lining up. As somebody once pointed out and said, why is this derelict? The derelict that Walter Sayre thinks he will become if he doesn't stop drinking and going with men with smoky eyes in bars in New York City. The shoeless homeless person is right next to Pris and Ernest Ransom. That's this. Somebody said, why are these people there? And he said, that's because that's who lines up at the rail. And anybody can come. And it's, Michael is, I guess, he asked the same editor who loved this book and then published another one, asked the same editor about the 7-part structure of Dingley of handling sin, which was the 7 sins and the 7 sacraments. These are 7 days. This is a single week. Right. Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday has the sermon. So it's hexameral like Paradise Lost, which is about creation. Michael said, now did the sacraments bother you, and did the religious business get in the way of handling sin, and which you'd really like it? And the editor said, no. He said, matter of fact, I didn't even notice it.
I didn't even notice it.
I didn't even notice it. Is it there really? Yes, it is really very much there, as is this moment. And it's not so much communion as it is community. And Ramona Dingley dying, it's interesting. There's no final concerning chapter. It's incomplete. And I said, Michael, that's an incomplete moment. Why isn't there a concerning chapter? Is it just because the secret base isn't there? And and is this a formal flaw? Have we found a flaw in the book? I just discovered this recently, just last week. And I think actually what it is he refused to give you that concerning chapter, that inner chapter, before you had the sermon, because the sermon almost does the inner chapter's job. But it's also Ramona Dingley dies, and she's having a set-to with God about the storm, and she asks for a sign, and she gets a flash of light, and she says, oh, that's just too theatrical. So we don't really know if she believes or doesn't believe, but she's had, of course, this huge theological, very literal-minded argument with Father Fields about the Christian story. And I think Michael is leaving that up for grabs. He's not really insisting that people understand it. And I think the communion is not merely the communion in a church, but it's also community,
Right.
because that's what the communication is in the corporate, what theologically it is. It's the incorporation of every individual in the body of the spiritual community, which is lodged in the Son.
Sure, and if you are what you eat, and we all take of the same loaf of bread, then we're all sort of that same, and wherever that came from. So the community becomes the communion, which is why to me it was more potential, because it wasn't all neatly wrapped up. There's a kind of degeneration through this book. I mean, the sense that we have these values on the surface, and then there's the rampage river that runs through it all, and so we can't really fight that, can we? But there's this, so that's, I took to be kind of what you might call human nature. But it's a particular kind of human nature in a particular place, in a particular time, in a particular polity. That seems to be degenerating. The idea that you would have a set of conservative values that degenerate to pure commodification and utter loss of conscience. So, do we continue to the point of destruction, or does this communion, reunion, reestablishment of community point to a new direction? And we don't know. It points, but again, we don't have that final concern.
I think it's very, very, very asserted with the greatest possible strength in when Judith, Holofernes' giant killer Haig, lies to, but then ultimately she shares the truth with Wenzel because she is going to have a relationship with him. They've been in love from the minute they saw each other. When he sees the weave of her jacket, when they're both with their heart conditions in Otto Scaper's office in the very beginning, when he sees the weave of her jacket and understands that everything is difficult for her, that's a classic sign that he understands who she is. Then they have this very, very careful moral relationship of this adjudication of the law. As I said, the law is going to save the place. It's not merely the communion rail, but it's also the law. And it's also her understanding that she cannot disconnect herself. Walter Sayre has given a very nice statement about art towards the end of the book, if I could do that. It's the very end of chapter 59. Maybe I can find it. I always like to read things. Okay. Do you know the Book of Kells? Asked Walter Sayre over orange juice in his study. To paraphrase them, Jonathan, life is not linear, not causal, not, pardon me, straight. They're both gay, of course. Look at us here, idiotically enamored in the midst of slapdash, heartbreaking mayhem, and all those flukes will loop into our lives, and we have looped into each other's and altered everything, including the future. Croissant, frozen, I fear, but my country, right or wrong. I just love Walter Sayre. Thank you. The Book of Kells, as Father feels, yes, those stir-crazy Irish monks have scribbled the truth around their capital letters. Life twists and turns or bounds upon itself, loops out, slides back, heads everywhere and nowhere, and inextricably connected. In their slightly crazy Gaelic way of showing life can be lovely, but honey, you sure can't see where it's going. So the Book of Kells, I think we're referencing Joyce, but we refuse to recognize it, that it's all connected. And then Judith's moral decision that she could not disconnect herself from Maynard Henry. That's more than a simple social contract or a new deal that we're dissolving now. It's a sense of the corporate body of the people as a whole. And that she saves Maynard. And Maynard says, I feel indebted. I don't understand this lady. I don't understand... what do I owe her now? How am I indebted to her? He doesn't want to be indebted to anybody. He wants to throw that off. But she has, he thinks it's disgusting that she has clearly fired another bullet into a corpse so that she can say she shot Barnum, and then get Maynard off from having killed her husband.
That's right.
It's complicated, just like Middlemarch. Middlemarch has got that complication. It's too bad you never got there because it's that kind of a complicated thing.
Couldn't finish it.
But this is, I think, not just the communion that might offer. It's indeed, Judith has been brought up, with that communion, in that communion, although she's no longer communicating. But she has made that decision about connection. She, who's the frailest and who seems the most fearful, can actually understand that.
I've got about 30 seconds left for the next one. Can you do it?
Sure.
Because the question is the relationship between poetry, prose, and politics.
Well, I think that's what we've been talking about all along. I think, right, the poetry of this prose, the language of the diction scenarios, the letters and plots, are telling the story of real human beings and all their daily lives, but it's also talking about the responsibility we all have to each other as members of this democracy and this corporate body of a country. And it can go very easily awry, and we need to be careful, but still have hope that law and care, communal care, and exquisite moral precision about what we do may be a way for us to prevail.
And the art and artifice of language.
Yes, yes.
Maureen Quilligan, what a pleasure.
Oh,
great.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And I get the feeling that even if he wasn't your husband, you would be delighted with this book, Dingley Falls, because it's a wonderful book. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maureen Quilligan is our guest today on Duke Reads, and thank all of you for being with us as well. I want to remind you that our next Duke Reads will not only be streamed live, it is a live conversation before a real audience here in our studio, or I guess elsewhere. In fact, the Duke Perkins Library with Duke professor and alumnus Tim Tyson, author of Blood Done Sign My Name, on the book that has changed his life. He's going to talk about The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. That is 3 o'clock on Wednesday, November 2nd. In the meantime, enjoy more great Duke programming every Thursday at noon with Duke Office Hours. Next up, October 13th, catch Kimberly Jenkins, Senior Advisor to Duke President and Provost for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Visit DukeOfficeHours.com for more information. And if you wish to view tonight's program again, it's going to be available at Duke On Demand through the Duke Reads site. That's DukeReads.com. I'm Frank Stasio. Thank you very much.